In a blistering congressional clash, Jasmine Crockett went head-to-head with Kash Patel, the man once trusted to guard America's deepest secrets. He sneered, calling her just a lawyer from Texas. She didn't blink. Instead, she dropped a sealed USB on the table, loaded with forensic proof tied to Patel's private email. His smirk vanished in seconds. What if the man sworn to protect the nation turns out to be its greatest threat? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing room was packed tight. Lawmakers, press, cameras burning hot. The air buzzed with tension. Kash Patel lounged in the witness chair like he owned the building, legs crossed, lips curled into a smug smile. He didn't glance at the committee. He looked straight at Jasmine Crockett, eyes dripping with disdain. When called to speak, Patel leaned into the mic, voice cold and cutting. "I'm honestly shocked I have to answer to someone like Miss Crockett, a first-term politician with zero understanding of national security." Gas rippled across the room. A few conservative lawmakers chuckled under their breath. Some clapped, sharp, mocking. Patel sat back, tapping the table, soaking in the reaction like it was applause. His tone dripped arrogance. The insult echoed, hanging in the chamber like a dare. Jasmine didn't move, didn't blink. She sat upright, hands resting on a folder, face unreadable. But her eyes, locked on him, were fire held behind glass. No words, no reaction, just silence. Heavy, focused, dangerous. And suddenly it was Kash Patel who looked too loud. The silence was thick, but Patel wasn't done. He leaned forward, voice rising, striking again with venom. "You've never even held a classified document," he scoffed. "You're an outsider playing dress-up, spewing cheap sound bites for cable news." His words slapped through the room like gunfire. A few Republican members chuckled openly. Others clapped, sharp, smug, like hyenas circling prey. Patel smirked wider, riding the moment like a victory lap. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She slowly reached for her microphone, her fingers calm, controlled. Then she spoke, quietly, clearly, with the kind of weight that didn't need to shout. "Mr. Patel," she said, eyes locked on him, "what I hold isn't a classified file. It's something far more powerful. The constitutional authority granted to me by the American people to hold men like you accountable." The entire room froze. A wave of electricity tore through the chamber. Conversations died mid-whisper. Even Patel's smirk faltered for a second. For the first time, she wasn't the one on defense, and Patel could feel the ground starting to shift beneath him. The silence had just begun to settle, tight, uneasy, when Patel leaned forward again, unwilling to let Jasmine walk away with the room. He wanted dominance, and he went for it without hesitation. His tone shifted from arrogant to cruel, his voice cutting deeper than before. "You're just a second-rate lawyer who stumbled into this room on a stroke of political luck," he said, each word deliberate, like he was carving it into the chamber walls. "I've dealt with national security at the highest level. You? You argued parking disputes in local courtrooms." The smirk returned, more vicious this time, and then came the dagger. "A lawyer from Texas." He spat those three words with disdain, stretching the syllables like poison. He didn't just mean to belittle her career, he meant to erase it. The phrase wasn't about geography, it was about hierarchy. Patel wanted to remind the room that he had walked the Pentagon halls while she walked through county courtrooms. To him, she didn't belong here. This was a warning shot disguised as mockery, and it was delivered like a veteran soldier dismissing a civilian in combat boots. A few lawmakers let out low, awkward chuckles. One or two aides whispered behind their folders, but the rest of the room sat still, stone-faced, tense, watching for the fallout. There was a shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable, like a string being pulled tighter with each second. Even Patel's own allies weren't laughing as loudly anymore. They were watching Jasmine, just like everyone else. She didn't speak immediately. She didn't adjust her mic or look down or even blink. Instead, Jasmine slowly tilted her head, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "I heard you, and I'm still not moved." Then she leaned in with surgical calm, her voice low and level, every syllable a scalpel. If you've defended the whole country, she said, not raising her tone, then you should understand better than anyone why transparency matters. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The moment hit like a hammer wrapped in silk. The chamber didn't react with gasps or applause, only silence. A heavy, weighted silence. Patel didn't speak. His smirk faltered, just slightly, enough for anyone watching closely to see the crack in the armor. The room didn't belong to him anymore. Every set of eyes turned toward him now, not with admiration, but with scrutiny. And just when the smirk on Patel's face seemed to settle in for good, Jasmine moved. She reached into her folder without saying a word, pulled out a thick government packet clipped at the corner, and placed it flat on the table with a quiet but deliberate thud, a sound that landed like a gavel in a courtroom. The room tensed as every head turned. The seal of the Department of Defense gleamed faintly under the overhead lights. On the cover, in bold block letters, were the words, Inspector General Report, June 2022. Jasmine didn't even look at Patel as she slid it across the table toward the chairman. Then she spoke, her voice steady but carrying the kind of weight that silenced every cough and shuffle in the chamber. This is the official IG report. It includes your name, specifically tied to 3 separate breaches of federal security protocol. She let that hang for a second, then added, Page 17 outlines an unauthorized transfer of classified documents to a personal email address. Page 24 cites your refusal to log a restricted meeting with a foreign national. And page 31, Mr. Patel, details your direct communication with a private defense contractor during an active Pentagon review without clearance. Her tone never wavered, but her words struck like steel. Every sentence was a nail in the coffin. She didn't accuse. She didn't speculate. She just read facts. And Patel's name was right there in black and white. Patel's laugh was instant and exaggerated, like a man trying too hard to look unbothered. He threw his head back, scoffing with theatrical disgust. A pile of cut-and-paste paperwork, he sneered, waving a dismissive hand. Classic nonsense from people who don't have a clue what they're reading. His voice dripped mockery, but behind the act, his fingers fidgeted against the table's edge. Jasmine didn't blink. Her eyes stayed locked on him, cold and sharp. Then came her reply, clean, calm, and devastating. Not my words, she said. That's the official conclusion of the very agency you once served. No emotion, no spike in volume, just truth, delivered like a pin pulled from a grenade. The reaction in the room was instant. Staffers leaned in, lawmakers whispered sharply to one another, heads turned, pages shuffled. One senior senator's mouth fell slightly open. The report had dropped like a bomb, and everyone knew the temperature had changed. The laughter stopped. The silence was gone, and Patel suddenly wasn't the one in control anymore. The report hadn't even cooled on the table, and Patel exploded. His face flushed deep red, the calm mask ripped off in a single breath. He slammed his palm on the table, the sound cracking through the chamber like a gunshot. Enough, he barked, his voice echoing off marble and wood. This is a smear campaign. I've risked my life for this country. My life. And you think you have the right to stand here and insult me? His arm shot out, finger pointed like a dagger. You don't belong at this table. You're not even in the same league. The room froze mid-breath. Gasps rose from a few corners. Some aides turned to each other in disbelief. Patel wasn't defending himself anymore. He was unraveling in public. His voice cracked with fury, not power. He had gone from control to chaos in seconds, and every eye could see it. But Jasmine didn't move. Not a blink. Not a twitch. She sat there like stone, her eyes locked on him, unfazed. Then came her answer. Low, steady, surgical. I'm not insulting you, she said. I'm just repeating the truth, and the truth doesn't need anyone's permission. Half the room fell silent like someone had cut the power. The other half buzzed with whispers, sharp and fast. You could feel it. Something had shifted. The energy, the balance, the control. Patel was no longer the one steering the room, but the silence following Jasmine's last line wasn't a pause. It was a setup. She knew it. Patel didn't. Slowly, she reached back into her folder, this time retrieving a second document. Clean, sharp-edged and folded with precision. She didn't rush. She unfolded it deliberately, then slid it across the polished table like it was the final card in a high-stakes game. The paper made the faintest sound, but the weight behind it was deafening. She looked Patel square in the eye, her voice calm but steady as stone. "This," she said, "is a financial statement confirming a transfer of $2.8 million into your personal account, Mr. Patel, from a private law conglomerate, while you were still in office." The chamber didn't gasp at once. It cracked, small reactions first, then swelling outward like a blast wave. One lawmaker leaned forward in disbelief, eyes wide. Aid folders lowered. Pens stopped. Several senators looked around the room, as if searching for someone else to confirm they'd just heard what they thought they had. Then she delivered the strike. Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't blink. "This was within the same fiscal quarter you swore under oath that you were living solely on government salary." That broke the room. A few members audibly exclaimed, one muttering, "Oh my God," just off mic. Another covered their face with a hand, not in defense, but in shame. Murmurs broke out in rapid waves. The air itself felt tighter, heavier, like the walls had drawn closer. The silence after was sharper than the noise before. No one was laughing now. Patel froze. For the first time all day, his body betrayed him. He shifted in his chair, eyes darting from the paper to the dais to the cameras. His throat moved, but his voice lagged behind. When it finally came, it was thinner, higher, almost desperate. That was a legal consulting arrangement, completely unrelated. But the confidence was gone. The sentence didn't land. It stumbled. He fumbled the words like a man reaching for a rope that wasn't there. His hand hovered near the edge of the table, fingertips tapping nothing. The room watched, not just the lie, but the unraveling. The silence after Patel's failed excuse was suffocating, but he wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. He sat up straighter, trying to rebuild the wall that had already cracked. His voice rose, but this time it was hollow, almost frantic. "This is a political hit job," he declared, gesturing broadly to the committee as if the sheer performance could will the doubt away. "A coordinated smear campaign designed to discredit my work." The words tumbled out fast, louder than before, but they didn't strike like truth. They landed like a desperate man throwing the last card in his hand. There was no anger in the room now, just quiet disbelief. He scanned the faces around him, looking for support. None came, not even from those who had chuckled earlier. The chamber watched him now with a different kind of stillness, measured, cold, unconvinced. His defiance, once sharp and arrogant, now sounded like something unraveling. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't look left or right. She just spoke, with clarity that shattered the performance. "If it's a smear campaign," she said, her voice low and cutting, "then why does the financial record carry your digital signature?" There was no response. Patel's mouth opened slightly and then closed again. He looked down, not at the document, but at the table, like it might swallow him whole. A bead of sweat formed just above his right brow, catching the light. He reached for a glass of water, but his hand hovered halfway, suspended midair like even his body wasn't sure what to do next. The room no longer belonged to him. And then, subtle, quiet, undeniable, it happened. Several senators who had remained motionless throughout the entire hearing slowly began to nod. Not performatively, not politically, but with the kind of shift that signaled something irreversible had just occurred. The truth had landed, and it wasn't on his side. Of all the blows Jasmine had landed that day, this one came with a silence that roared louder than anything spoken before. The room was still frozen from the last exchange, but Jasmine moved with the slow, surgical precision of someone who knew the final cut was coming. No build-up, no announcement. Just a quiet reach into her folder, and then she pulled it out. A small, matte black USB drive sealed in a tamper-evident red security strip. It looked almost unremarkable, but the moment it hit the table, the weight of it hit the room like a final verdict. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words sliced through the tension like a scalpel. "This," she said, "is a forensic extract pulled directly from a secure internal archive. It's been authenticated by two independent analysts. The contents are not speculative. They're not hearsay. They are verified. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was definitive. And that made it even deadlier. A clerk stepped forward and took the drive. Patel didn't move. He sat stiff, his knuckles white against the edge of the table. On screen, the feed flickered once, then displayed a clean white email interface. The subject line was empty. The body of the message held only a single sentence. Delete all records. Keep quiet. Shirikiyapai. There were no timestamps visible, no names needed, just initials. His initials. A full confession delivered in 7 words. No one breathed. No gasps. No whispers. No coughing behind folders. It was a level of silence that felt unnatural. Thick, suffocating, like the air had been yanked out of the room. Even the lights above seemed dimmer. Every person in the chamber stared at that screen as if the words were still sinking in, as if the consequences had not yet found gravity. Patel stared at it too. But unlike the others, he didn't blink. He didn't move. His body had gone rigid, his chest rising in shallow, uneven beats. His eyes looked glossed, locked in place, like he couldn't believe what was on the screen. Even though he knew it was real, it wasn't just evidence. It was his own voice in text, his own hand ordering the cover-up. And then, with lips barely able to form the words, his voice broke into the silence. I need a lawyer. It didn't come from strength. It didn't come from strategy. It came from defeat, from the realization that the ground beneath him was no longer there. And just like that, the illusion shattered. There was no spin Patel could summon, no tone of authority left in his voice, no protective wall of party loyalty to shield him. The screen had spoken. His own words, undeniable and damning, hung in the air like smoke from a shot that couldn't be unfired. The moment had turned on him entirely. He didn't try to challenge it. He didn't argue. He didn't blink. He just broke. His spine curled forward, slowly at first, like the weight of the evidence was dragging him into himself. His shoulders, once squared and defiant, now sagged with the heaviness of disgrace. His chin dropped until it hovered just above the surface of the polished wood, as if the hearing table might swallow him whole if he got any closer. Kash Patel, the man who swaggered into the chamber with all the arrogance of a king, now looked like a prisoner at the end of his trial. And the jury wasn't even debating anymore. His hands gave it away. They trembled beneath the table, fingers twitching like they didn't belong to him. His left thumb rubbed the edge of his palm in a frantic, nervous loop, again and again, like muscle memory searching for a defense that didn't exist. Every breath he took seemed shallower than the last. He wouldn't look at Jasmine. He wouldn't look at the screen. He wouldn't even look at himself. The chairman sat in stunned silence for a moment longer, his lips pressed into a grim, thin line. Then he reached for the gavel. Slowly, deliberately, he raised it as if giving Patel one last chance to speak, to salvage something. Anything. Patel didn't move. Crack. The gavel fell like the closing note of a verdict that needed no deliberation. It wasn't just the end of a hearing. It was the end of a facade. A role Patel had performed for years with swagger, with certainty, with sheer volume. All gone now, replaced by silence and the truth that had stripped him bare. Mr. Patel, the chairman said, voice low but direct, you are now facing evidence that cannot be disputed. The words weren't angry. They weren't dramatic. They were worse. They were final, cold, clear, inevitable. And every person in that room understood what they meant. There was no maybe left, no room for interpretation. What Jasmine had brought forward was no longer an allegation. It was fact, on paper, on screen, signed, sealed, buried. A few seats creaked as lawmakers shifted uncomfortably. The tension in the chamber wasn't explosive anymore. It was heavy, suffocating like fog that settled into your lungs. The silence wasn't stunned now. It was resolved, and Patel was alone. He didn't respond to the chairman. He didn't nod, didn't protest. He just sat there, hands trembling, face pale, staring into a fixed point on the table, as though staring hard enough could make the world disappear. He looked smaller now, diminished, not just in stature, but in presence. The man who had opened the hearing by ridiculing Jasmine Crockett in front of millions, mocking her experience, dismissing her right to even sit across from him, now couldn't even lift his eyes. Across the room, the shift in energy was quiet, but absolute. Even his allies, the ones who had clapped earlier, the ones who had exchanged smirks at every jab he threw, were silent now. A senator from South Carolina, who had nodded in approval when Patel mocked Jasmine as a lawyer from Texas, now leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, lips pressed together, eyes nowhere near Patel. Another from Arizona slowly uncapped a pen and began scribbling on a legal pad, pointlessly just to look busy. The silence from their side of the room wasn't just avoidance, it was abandonment. No one came to his defense. No one objected. No one interrupted the chairman. No one demanded clarification or suggested that maybe the evidence was being misinterpreted. They didn't even fake outrage because they knew, and worse, they knew everyone else knew. The cameras had captured it. The screen had shown it. The record was public now. Patel's collapse wasn't just personal, it was political. And in Washington, that's the kind that echoes. Jasmine hadn't said a word since the email appeared. She didn't need to. She sat still, hands folded, eyes steady. There was no smirk on her face, no visible victory, just the presence of someone who came prepared, executed with precision, and let the truth do the damage. Her silence now spoke more than 1,000 sound bites ever could. The red-sealed USB that had delivered the final blow still sat on the table, quiet, small, and lethal. A device that now felt heavier than any document ever printed. It didn't need an argument to support it. The signature inside had done all the talking. The media representatives seated in the gallery said nothing, but their pens flew. Some typed furiously into tablets. Others had already stood up quietly and moved toward the back of the room. Phones pressed to their ears, likely preparing headlines that would hit the internet before Patel made it out of the building. But Patel wasn't moving. He sat completely still now, except for the occasional twitch of his right hand. His suit, perfectly tailored that morning, now looked like it was swallowing him whole. The bright, commanding tone he'd started with? Gone. That fire, that bravado, burned out. All that remained was a man forced to reckon with something he'd never prepared for. Consequences. Behind the dais, the chairman looked down at his own copy of the evidence again, as if confirming to himself that what had just happened was real. He exhaled slowly, then looked out at the room. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to, because no one, not even Patel, was pretending anymore. And silence was no longer confusion. It was clarity, and judgment, and shame. And Kash Patel was finally feeling all three. The air had gone still, like the eye of a storm had passed through. The room wasn't breathing. Chairs didn't creak. Phones didn't buzz. Even the guards at the doors had frozen in place. All eyes were locked on Patel, pale, trembling, sinking deeper into his seat, as if he thought the floor might open and swallow him whole. But the silence wasn't for him. It was waiting for her. Jasmine Crockett didn't rush. She stood up with deliberate calm, as if the weight of what had just unfolded wasn't crushing, but clarifying. Her body straightened, not with arrogance, but with unshakable conviction, like someone who had nothing left to prove, and yet everything left to protect. There were no theatrics, no raised fist, no dramatic pause for applause, just a slow rise into history. She stepped forward, letting her fingers brush the edge of the desk before turning slightly toward the entire chamber. She didn't look left or right. She looked ahead, past the committee members, past the cameras, past the smirks that had vanished and the defenses that had collapsed. And when she spoke, her voice didn't thunder. It cut. "Today isn't about me," she said, her tone low, unwavering, soaked in steel. "And it's not about Mr. Patel." The use of Mr. wasn't accidental. It wasn't just legal decorum, it was surgical. A final reminder that even men who operate behind closed doors, hidden behind government titles and national security shields, must answer to something higher than status. "It's about the truth," she continued, her voice growing more grounded with each word. and about whether the American people still have the right to know when someone puts personal gain above national security. For a second, the room didn't move. The words hadn't landed. They detonated. Then came the sound, a single chair scraping back, then another, then feet shuffling, a soft gasp, and finally, like a fuse had finally reached the charge, the chamber exploded into thunderous applause. It wasn't polite clapping. It wasn't scripted or partisan. It was raw, physical, rising from stomachs that had been knotted with tension for hours. Lawmakers who had never agreed on a single vote in years were now standing side by side, clapping not just for a woman, but for a moment of clarity. Staffers dropped pens and stood too. Even a few older aides who had seen 1,000 hearings in their careers wiped their eyes discreetly as they joined the crowd. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't flinch under the applause. She held the line, not smiling, not blinking, just standing tall in her truth, like it had always been waiting for this exact second to be heard. Across the room, Patel was dissolving. His body had shrunk beneath the weight of his own undoing. No more smirks, no more defiance. The emails had spoken. The forensics had spoken. And now Jasmine had spoken. His mouth hung slightly open, but no words came out. No denials, no threats, only silence. And the quiet recognition of a man who knew this story was no longer his to control. Behind him, the Republican senators who had earlier defended him so loudly were now avoiding eye contact. One shifted uncomfortably. Another adjusted his tie but kept his gaze fixed on the carpet. No one leaned forward anymore. No one interrupted. No one dared offer Patel so much as a nod. His isolation was complete, visible, damning, and irreversible. The chairman, still seated, didn't even try to suppress the emotion in his voice as he tapped the gavel once, lightly, like a punctuation mark rather than a demand. The applause didn't stop immediately, but it softened into respectful silence again, like a collective acknowledgement that something bigger than policy had just taken place. In that moment, the scene crystallized. Kash Patel, slumped over, broken by the weight of his own orders. The committee silenced not by shame, but by the undeniable presence of truth. And Jasmine Crockett standing center stage, not victorious, but resolute. She had not come for a fight, but she had fought. She had not asked to be the symbol, but now she was one. Not just for justice, not just for oversight, but for every person in the country who had asked themselves in recent years whether accountability still existed in America. The cameras kept rolling, but this wasn't for the cameras anymore. One young woman in the gallery, possibly an intern, clutched her notepad like a lifeline. Her eyes were wide, her breath shaky. She wasn't watching a hearing. She was watching proof. Proof that someone, somewhere, would stand up when it counted. That someone wouldn't back down when power barked. That someone could walk into a chamber of stone-faced men and walk out having cracked the walls themselves. No dramatic music played. No slogans appeared on screens. But the emotion was undeniable. Jasmine didn't speak again. She didn't need to. Her final words still lingered in the air, louder than any microphone. And as the committee officially adjourned, people remained standing, not out of protocol, but out of respect. As Patel remained frozen in disgrace, Jasmine slowly collected her papers, not rushed, not shaken. She turned toward the exit with a calm so sharp it almost glittered. Her eyes didn't scan the room. They focused forward, like a soldier who had finished her mission, but knew the war was far from over. And in that final image, Patel collapsing under guilt, and Jasmine walking straight, shoulders squared, unbending, America found something it had nearly forgotten. That truth, when spoken without fear, is louder than power. And that in the right hands, a microphone can become a sword. And as Jasmine turned from the chamber, her words still hanging like smoke in the air, it became clear. This wasn't just a takedown. It was a reckoning. Some moments don't make headlines, but they make history. What happened in that room wasn't just about Patel. It wasn't about classified folders or sealed subpoenas. It was about a system that let him operate for years, unchecked and untouchable. And more importantly, it was about what happens when someone refuses to look away. Jasmine Crockett didn't bring noise. She brought proof. While others blinked, she stared down power. While others looked for permission, she brought confrontation. And in that, she didn't just defeat a man, she exposed a machine. One that thrives on silence. One that assumes nobody will ever dare to pull back the curtain. This is what makes her stand unforgettable. She reminded a cynical public that truth still has weight, that you don't need to shout to shake the ground, and that even the most polished lies unravel fast when someone walks in with facts, not fear. Patel was just the face. The real target was something bigger: complacency. That quiet voice in every institution and that says, don't dig too deep, don't ask too much, let it go. Jasmine didn't let it go. She didn't blink. And that's where her power came from. Not from a title, not from a party, but from the absolute refusal to be bullied into silence. And what she showed us matters. Because there are Patels in every city, in every department, in every back room where decisions get made. Maybe they don't carry classified files, but they carry the same arrogance. The same belief that if they smile enough, no one will ask what's behind the door. But not anymore. Jasmine's calm wasn't weakness. It was precision. It was strategy. And it was a signal to every young woman watching, to every activist afraid to speak, to every citizen who thinks they're alone. You're not crazy for noticing the rot. You're just early. And that's the heart of the lesson. The system doesn't change when you scream at it. It changes when you stand in front of it and make it answer to its own rules. She didn't throw chairs. She didn't curse. She asked the questions no one else dared to ask. And when the answers didn't come, she brought the receipts. The quiet kind of justice. The kind that doesn't need applause, only accountability. So what do we take from all this? That courage isn't some grand cinematic explosion. Sometimes it's just holding your ground. Sometimes it's asking the same question 3 times until the lie breaks. And sometimes it's doing it even when every camera, every stare, and every bit of power in the room is aimed at shutting you down. That's what Jasmine did. And she didn't do it to trend. She did it because no one else was going to. And when she asked, what do you do when silence is no longer safe? That wasn't just a question for Patel. That was for us. Because silence is easy. Speaking is hard. But silence is how systems like Patel's survive. That's how the rot spreads quietly, behind closed doors, in overlooked memos, in ignored voices. But after today, fewer people will stay quiet. Because Jasmine's stand didn't just end one man's illusion of safety. It lit a fuse under every other one who thought no one was watching. And that's the real victory, not the headline, not the applause, but the shift, the moment when fear changes sides. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.